All right. For my friends in North America, if you're experiencing another one of these repeated heat dome phenomena, yeah, I feel especially bad for my Canadian friends who might not be used to 100 plus degree temperatures. Stay cool, stay in the shade, fans, air conditioning, hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. I know how dangerous this can be. I have lived in places where this is pretty normal, and I moved away from those places. But for whatever reason this year, it seems to be following me a lot. So yeah, take care of yourselves. In that vein, the last thing I really want to be doing today is moving around very much, but it's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, maneuvering. Been meaning to get to this topic. I figured I should start addressing it. Now, warning, this is going to be a multi-part presentation because I want to talk about at least my interpretation of Musashi's opinion on the subject and then what I use. Now, again, I don't consider myself any kind of master expert, anything like that, nor do I ever intend to contradict what you're being taught, learning, practicing. If I can add something useful, or at least give you something to compare and contrast to, a little different insight, or maybe you just like hearing me explain stuff, great. This is also not intended to be any sort of presentation of a traditional martial art. I've studied a lot of them, but really hybridized it into what works for this old man. So, and I'm still learning, so we'll get that conversation going in the comments as always after the video. But let's start with part one. Musashi's take on maneuvering. Revisiting caveat 3 very quickly. I do not intend this to be representative of the teachings of the traditional Koryu, ni Tenichi Ryu. Okay? This is just my interpretation of Musashi based on his writings and then applied to, well, all the different martial arts that I practiced in, like 45 years. In the same way that a HEMA practitioner would study those old masters and apply those classics to try to make them work in live sparring, fencing, fighting. Same thing. So, Musashi's most basic advice is first, he was no fan of any kind of artificial, fixed, or especially specialized stepping. His primary advice was to move in the fight the same way you move in your day-to-day life. Now, I kind of break that down into two different flavors. First of all would be moving if you were moving in pretty much a straight line over a long distance, like walking down a street or something like that. You will certainly vary how you do that depending on how quickly you're moving, what you're carrying, and what the terrain is and what your footwear is, right? Without thinking about it too much. But more importantly, especially in the context of, well, my experience of the fight, more confined spaces with more, well, variable environments. Again, caveat 2, I don't intend to contradict anything that you are being taught, learning, training, whatever, but I don't necessarily feel like the dojo is doing you any favors in this application, because think about a dojo. It's usually a big open space with a nice controlled floor and hopefully no obstacles in your way except maybe your fellow students. Might not be doing you the best service to being able to apply what you're learning in the real world. So I definitely recommend taking that training and trying it in different environments, different terrains, rocks, grass, uneven ground. What's it like to do it on a sloped or inclined surface, or potentially slick or rocky surface, or where there are different levels like steps and things like that, or maybe there's gopher holes in your yard or something that you've got to watch out for, or obstacles in your way. Now, I've mentioned that I do a lot of my training, well, wherever I happen to be, which is normally indoors and not necessarily big rooms. And while I do practice forms that have fixed specialized stepping patterns, and I still practice them, if I don't have the room to practice them, I will have to adjust the form. So I may wind up needing to step and I don't have the room to step, so I try to do the technique without doing the step, or I shift my feet in place if it's really important for me to have the other foot forward. Now, am I losing certain benefits from that traditional form and its stepping in doing that? Well, yeah, potentially. But at the same time, I'm adapting it to a restrictive environment, which would also include an opponent that's moving unpredictably. So yeah, being able to adjust what I'm doing to whatever space I'm in or have, but think beyond that. Not only the space you have and the obstacles around you, but back to that terrain thing, even indoors. Think about the footwear versus the surface. When you're moving around day-to-day life, okay, think about these things that you usually don't think about. You are usually doing activities with your, well, most of us are not doing them with our feet. We're usually doing most of our activities with our upper body, right? So whatever environment we're in, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, office, classroom, hallway, laundry room, wherever, right? Shop. You move from place to place to get your arms and upper body to where you need to reach to do the thing, whether it's one arm, the other arm, both arms, where your eyes are focused, what kind of leverage you need, we'll talk about to do the job, without thinking about your feet too much. Now, if the terrain is different or your footwear is different, higher or lower traction, you're going to adjust. For instance, there are certainly traditional arts and forms that I practice that use a lot of spinning. But if I'm on a higher traction surface and or have higher traction footwear on, that's not going to happen like that. Yeah, I'm going to do the pivot and my foot's going to be glued to the floor and I'm going to hurt myself or I'm going to fail the technique. Yeah, I'm going to have to do something differently. And in day-to-day life, you usually do that. Or you trip over your feet, stub your toe, whatever. Move the same way you move around your environment to get to the places you need to get and do the things you need to do with either the short or long little adjustments, turns, whatever it is, to get where you need to get. Now, there are many benefits to this. First of all, you'll notice Musashi, if you read him, he doesn't really spend the time specifying which foot to have forward when doing a technique. Why? Because he's always looking big picture. What you're doing is a whole concept, tactic, strategy versus your opponent and what he's doing, how he's responding. So your brain should be on that and not on this. Also, yeah, there are certain physical and biomechanical benefits to certain of those stances and stepping patterns practiced in traditional forms. But natural moving is, well, it's efficient and it's usually relaxed. I mean, we're usually pretty lazy about how we move around, right? So having that mindset in a fight is immediately kind of soothing and normalizing. It takes one less tension triggering thing out of the equation. Hopefully, though, you are able to apply good body mechanics in your normal maneuvering. You're keeping, reasonable shock absorbing in your joints, thinking about your balance, where your center of gravity is, not overextending. However, there are, of course, exceptions to that rule depending on what you need to do. You might need to reach over something or reach too high or squat down too low to reach something in your day-to-day life. Hopefully you do that with good body mechanics. Now, a couple of basics to kind of reflect on that I've talked about in other videos for me. First of all, whether I'm upright or leaning. Well, that depends on what I'm doing, right? It should also kind of depend on what you're doing. Most of the time, for most casual activity, with the most freedom of movement, you tend to be more upright, usually. But sometimes you got to reach to lean to get to where you need to get, one way or another. But think about what happens when you need to exert force on something. You need to push a heavy piece of furniture or a car or something like that, right? You're going to lean into it, naturally. Hopefully you're not going to overlean. Think about what would happen if that thing suddenly moved out of your way, right? Same thing, the way you would adjust your stance if you needed to carry something heavy or maybe something that's very adjustable like your end of a heavy piece of furniture. Think about how you move and adjust your posture and your body mechanics to do that, to get up and down, to adjust to that person suddenly moving in the wrong direction, having to take it going up or down stairs. Think about those natural adjustments that I hope you make with smart, safe body mechanics. You can certainly apply those to combat without learning whole new skill sets. The other basic lesson I take from, across the board is, I've talked about this before, my concepts of high, narrow versus low, wide stances. For me, a more upright posture with my feet about shoulder width apart or maybe a little bit narrower. This is great for that out of measure, free, relaxed maneuvering that allows me to move big or small, however I need to move quickly in any conceivable direction. It tends to be how, as lazy human beings, we normally move about our environments to get stuff done, right? But when I feel like I am needing to apply leverage to striking, blocking, or especially grappling, just like lifting or pushing that heavy piece of furniture, I tend to lean a little bit more into it and, yes, automatically widen and lower my stance. I still keep my center of gravity where it needs to be. I don't overextend front foot, back foot. Keep myself as safe. Use my best leverage, my best lifting practices, whatever you want to call them, to respond to that situation, not get hurt, not lose control in a natural way. Again, the more you can make this natural, the less you have to concentrate on this, concentrate on the more important stuff that's happening, and you tend to be more relaxed. It's one less thing to stress about. Now, flashing forward, I'm going to be applying this to, well, the future chapters of this series, which are about the ways that I tend to maneuver in all of my practices, and I've broken those down into 4 basic types: the slide, the angular step, the circular, and the spinning steps. So we'll get to that in future chapters, but until then, did this make any sense? Let's get that conversation going in the comments. As always, love having those conversations with you. Happy to try to answer any of your questions, and yes, that does tend to inspire many, many new videos that I'm trying to keep up with. And as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back for, well, to be continued.